They grabbed me by the hair outside the Blue Heron Diner on Market Street, while the sky was still the color of dishwater, and the coffee inside hadn't decided if it wanted to be kind or cruel. And I didn't scream, I didn't swing, I just looked past the uniforms into somebody's shaking phone and said steady as I could watch what happens next. It's strange how the world gets quiet when power thinks it's winning, like even the pigeons hold their breath and the air waits for a verdict. The hand in my hair stung sharp and mean, and I told myself, keep your chin up, Ray. You only own one thing right now, and it's how you choose to stand. The tall officer with new boots had the voice of a man who solves problems by getting louder. "Why are you here?" he said, like the sentence had already been written, and I nodded at the apron folded under my arm and told him I serve grits and eggs. It's not a felony, and he blinked like he hadn't rehearsed for humor before sunrise. The shorter one, cheeks flushed, kept his fist in my hair like a leash, wintergreen gum on his breath. "Smart mouth," he muttered. And beyond him I heard a car door slam and a ripple of phones popping up one after another, the way prairie dogs rise when thunder walks the ground. Somebody whispered she didn't do anything, and those words perched on the morning like a bird that suddenly remembers its voice, and the pressure shifted a degree then another because power tilts like that quietly at first while nobody admits it's moving. I didn't offer them rage because rage gets handcuffed and mocked on the evening news, so I did the only dangerous thing I could afford. I held my silence like armor and stared exactly where fear lives and refused to visit that place, and it rattled them. You could see it, the tremor in the shorter one's fingers, the way the tall one glanced at his partner, then the phones, then the ground, like it might open and swallow the whole situation. And I said stories don't always end the way you expect. Sometimes they begin where somebody tried to end them, and the grip loosened, the breath came back, and I walked into the diner with hands shaking so hard I knocked over a rack of ketchup, like I was auditioning for Clumsy. By lunch, the video had 3 angles and 2 hashtags and 100 strangers arguing about whether my jaw looked defiant or scared, and by late afternoon the department posted a can-shaped statement about reviewing all incidents to ensure community trust, which is local government for, "We hope this blows over by Tuesday." Yeah, that happened. I turned my phone off, which for me is modern prayer, and finished my shift, riding a fake calm like a tired horse. Then took the long way home past the Leaning Cross at the Methodist Church and Mr. Patel's corner store where he keeps a jar of butterscotch for kids who remember, please and thank you, hoping the day would fold itself back into ordinary. But the comments kept multiplying like fruit flies around a warm soda, and the notifications kept buzzing like a hive that had learned my name. I wasn't someone looking to be complicated. Believe me, I was a scholarship kid at Eastside State, once arguing case law and writing footnotes like they were lifelines, until my mother got arrested on a lie that ate our savings, our time, and whatever faith we had left for people with laminated badges, and I left school to juggle night shifts and court dates, learned the vocabulary of waiting rooms and closed doors of public defenders, who care but carry too many names in their binders of judges who won't meet your eyes unless you cry, and we survived. But something inside me went quiet. Not dead, just quiet. And that quiet is what I carried to the diner that morning. Stubborn peace, the dare to stay human when the moment pushes you to be anything but. By the next day, my face had become something screens used to decide if they wanted a villain or a hero. The mayor said we'd get to the bottom of it. The chief of police, Nora Halverson, did her best. I care about you blink on the local news and promised a full investigation. And a friend texted to remind me that the same chief had been a sergeant when my mother's case went sideways, which sits in your chest like a stone because the past loves to loop its rope through the present, you know what I mean? The black SUV showed up 2 nights later like a thought you don't want, slow and certain, and 2 men in suits stepped out into heat that punishes the overdressed internal affairs, the tall one said, flashing something shiny in a way that made me think of a magician's coin, and the shorter one held a notebook upside down and asked about the video, about who filmed it, about whether I had ties to people who like to hold signs, and chant about whether I planned to sue, and I answered clean and small like folded laundry, and they traded a look that said the truth was inconvenient and left a silence that felt like it was listening for fear. Andre stood at the window with his arms folded like the first time kids teased him for his lisp. "They aren't here to help," he said. "They're here to see if you scare easy." "Do I look scared?" I asked, and he didn't answer, which is his way of saying yes, and also, you still have a pulse. Close to midnight, my phone buzzed with an unknown number and a message that read, "I know what they did to your mother. I can help Merritt Street Library backdoor midnight tomorrow, come alone." And I read it 3 times to see if the words would rearrange themselves into something friendly. They did not, so I didn't sleep. I ironed the same shirt twice and watched an owl documentary because the narrator sounded like he could keep a secret. And at 11:53 p.m., with my heart counting down like a microwave, I stood behind the library by a dumpster that smelled like wet paper and old stories. A figure in a gray hoodie stepped out of the dark so my soul could practice fainting, handed me a flash drive like it might burn his fingers. "Everything you need is here," he said, voice soft, like he didn't want to wake history. "Don't try to follow me." "Who are you?" I asked, and he shook his head. "I'm tired," he said, then walked back into the dark and disappeared like a sentence that never got its verb. I plugged the drive into my old laptop with the missing B key, and the screen filled with folders named after years and people and places you don't forget on purpose, emails and memos and footage and a string of reports that looked like someone had copy-pasted their way through other people's pain. And there it was. My mother's case now. A puzzle that finally had its corner pieces, and around it a pattern, like a spiderweb missing evidence. Here carbon copy language, there the same names floating from file to file like fish under ice, and one grainy city camera video that had apparently remembered how to tell the truth that night in a convenience store where my mother bought dollar hot dogs to cheer us up. Sometimes her hands open, her voice calm, and in the corner a woman in uniform stepping to the officer in charge. And if you look close enough, the badge is clear. Sergeant Halverson, the same person who went on TV to promise me light. I didn't scream because furniture doesn't need apologies. I just sat while the past blinked at me and made copies of everything, sent a folder to a friend out of state with a note that said, "In case I forget how doors work," emailed a civil rights lawyer whose name I had written on a napkin last year and never called because I was too tired to start a fight. I wasn't sure I could finish, printed 3 pages for Andre, and watched him read with his jaw clenched like he was holding a bridge in place. "What are you going to do?" he asked, and the easy answer is always nothing, because nothing is tidy and quiet and lets you sleep sometimes. But my hands were already moving without asking permission from fear. "I'm going to say it out loud," I told him all of it. We didn't have a grand rollout, just City Hall and a borrowed projector and a dozen microphones that looked like hungry birds and reporters I recognized from car dealership commercials, and a line of people in church clothes holding their breath behind a metal barrier. And when I stepped up, my knees wobbled like shopping cart wheels, and I told them my name and said I'd been told to stay quiet. But quiet is how a system multiplies, and I was done being a backup singer for somebody else's song, and I hit play, and for one long minute the room forgot how to move. Then someone said, "Oh my God," and the phones rose and the questions came, and somewhere behind me a door opened and closed, and I knew without turning that Chief Halverson had left before her face finished catching up. I answered what I could, what it feels like to be a person instead of a problem, and the lawyer took the pieces with teeth, timelines, and statutes and the long road of accountability. And by dark, the protests had formed on the steps with candles and optimism. The counter-protests arrived with flags and fury. The mayor tried to balance on a fence covered in splinters, and the police union said smear and witch hunt and low morale, and a voice from the Department of Justice found the napkin lawyer and said pattern and practice and consent decree and reopen. And I slept 3 hours that week between calls from strangers and threats that sounded like they'd run out of synonyms for shut up. And I kept going to the diner because if people wanted to ruin our mornings, they'd have to fight the coffee too. The sedans with nondescript paint started loitering at the end of the block like teenagers with nowhere better to be. My manager cried when a man called to say he'd burn the place down if I kept showing up. And on the morning I took the stand in court, the wood was polished and the lights were loud, and the city attorney had the smooth face of a person who thinks tone can erase context. "Ms. Collins, isn't it possible you perceive things incorrectly?" he said. And I told him I was a waitress for 8 years and could tell when a plate is hot and when someone's trying to burn me. And the gallery laughed, then remembered the rule about emotions in rooms like that. And the judge looked at me like I was a homework assignment he'd been avoiding, and I told the truth about that morning and about silence as armor, and about watching a stranger's phone decide if I was worthy, and about my mother, and about the night the public defender said charges dropped like you get your time back with a receipt, and about the drive and the names and the grainy video that taught me institutional memory. It isn't that they forget, it's that they count on you to. When I stepped down, my legs shook hard enough to worry me, but Andre was at the bottom of the steps holding out the kind of hug that feels like a bridge over a river you didn't know you were crossing. And outside, the microphones swarmed like thirsty bees, and I gave them one line because I had only one left. Sometimes justice starts the minute you stop asking permission to tell the truth, and I went home and ate a grilled cheese that tasted like victory and worry at the same time and told my scalp to forgive my head for the way it remembered a hand. The next morning, the mayor called for an independent review. The chief went on leave pending outcomes, which is city speak for, "We feel the heat and would like shade," and the union filed a defamation suit against me, which in certain zip codes means we're losing the plot and need a new one. And I sat at the kitchen table while the sun sneaked through the blinds and realized I wasn't angry as much as I was awake, and that difference matters because anger burns through your fuel, but awake lets you steer. In week 3, the DOJ folks arrived with legal pads and patience, and people started talking like the town had found a way to open its throat. Files moved a retired officer who used to make balloon animals at fairs, sat across from me at a coffee shop and cried into a napkin because he had tried to push back once and got turned into a cautionary tale, and he slid me a photo of a squad room bulletin board from a decade ago with a list, names and actions and dates, my mother's initials in the corner next to a night that still flips my stomach when I try to remember it. And he said, "I'm sorry with the kind of shame you can smell." And I believed him because sorry without weight doesn't bend the air the way his did. I didn't clap when the first suspension letters went out or dance when a judge signed an order to unseal cases that should never have been sealed. But I did cry when a man I'd never met walked out of the courthouse after losing 10 years to a charge that should have been a warning, and said he thought the sky would be a different color, and it wasn't. It was the same stubborn blue. And that's the lesson. The movies never love. The world doesn't turn gold when you do something brave. The trash still needs taking out people. Still cut in line at the DMV. Your heart still skips when an unfamiliar car idles too long under your window. But your voice changes even when you're quiet. It changes the room. A month after the video, we had a town hall that didn't feel like theater. People spoke to each other instead of at each other. A kid asked if all cops are bad, and a retired firefighter said no, but the ones who protect the bad ones are. And silence is a sigh, not a shrug. And somebody argued, and somebody clapped, and someone said we were moving too fast, and someone else said we were late. And I thought, this is what growth sounds like, loud and messy and real. If you want a clean ending, I don't have one to sell. Chief Halverson hired an expensive attorney who says the video is out of context and the union still wants a judge to scold me in italics, and sometimes a car I don't recognize lingers long enough for me to memorize the dent near its left tail light. And the 2 officers from that morning, Sergeant Caleb Pike and Officer Owen Jansen, are off the front lines, one on medical leave, the other sending a letter through his lawyer that spirals around an apology without landing, saying he fears for his family. And I read it twice and put it away because I fear for mine too, and because I don't have room in one body for both hate and hope, and I choose hope when I can afford it. The twist you might have missed in all the noise is that the same system that bruised my scalp is the one that recorded its own fingerprints on the past. A city camera that decided not to lie. A sergeant who grew into a chief, who grew into a press conference where her voice tried to sound like justice while the tape told a different story. And that is the crack light poured through. Not a miracle, just an opening, and I walked toward it because of a promise I made to my mother on a night when everything felt like it was falling in slow motion. The promise that I wouldn't let a lie write our ending, and for a long time I didn't keep it. I kept the bills paid and the fridge humming and the shoes from falling apart, but I didn't keep the promise. And then a hand in my hair and a choir of phones taught me how to keep it with my feet and with my breath. So here we are in a town learning how to look itself in the eye without flinching. I still serve grits and eggs, and I still burn pancakes when I'm rattled, and I still prefer a quiet porch to any podium. But if you come for me with paperwork and pressure and the assumption I'll fold, know this. I learned how to stand without shouting, and sometimes that is the loudest sound in the room. And I know some of you think I should have kept my head down and taken a settlement and let the story fade like a song you liked last summer, and some of you think I didn't go far enough, and that justice needs teeth, not candles, and some of you wear a badge or love someone who does, and you are tired of being painted with the wrong brush, and all I can say is that I hear you, I do, and I'm not here to win the internet, I'm here to keep the promise and tell the truth without asking permission. If you stayed with me this far, tell me what you felt inside, the moment before I spoke into that phone camera. Tell me if I was right to hold my silence instead of fighting back in the first second. Tell me if you believe a system can change from the inside, or if it only changes when light burns hot from the outside. Tell me if you've seen someone treated like a problem for simply standing where they were, and whether you stepped in or stayed quiet. And why tell me what justice looks like to you? A courtroom, a policy, an apology, a badge that finally means protection for everyone. And if this story pressed on a bruise you carry, I'm listening. And if you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because Harbor Ridge is writing a story, and it needs witnesses. And if you've been here from the beginning, thank you for keeping me steady. This isn't the end. It might not even be the middle. It's the page where we finally said the quiet part out loud and dared the echo to answer.